In 100 AD, a man standing on the Palatine Hill could look out over a city of 1 million people. 1 million. There was no other city like it on Earth. There wouldn't be again for over 1,700 years, not until London in the 1800s. But here's what almost nobody thinks about when they picture ancient Rome. The city wasn't built by emperors with unlimited gold. It wasn't conjured by genius architects with modern tools. It was built by a civilization that had been, just 5 centuries earlier, a cluster of mud huts on a river bend in central Italy, constantly under threat, frequently burning down, nearly wiped out at least 3 times. What you are about to see is how that cluster of huts became the most complex urban environment the world had ever produced, and what it actually felt like to walk through it. 753 BC, legend says a man named Romulus drew a line in the dirt and called it a city. The reality was less dramatic. A few Latin-speaking tribes on adjacent hills sharing a river crossing, timber houses, livestock in the streets, a small market where farmers traded grain. By 509 BC, they'd expelled their kings and invented something new, a republic. 2 elected consuls instead of 1 king, power shared, ambition checked. In 390 BC, Gauls from northern Italy sacked the city and burned most of it to the ground. Rome rebuilt, wider streets, stronger walls. By 270 BC, Rome controlled the entire Italian peninsula. The population had doubled, then doubled again. By 44 BC, Julius Caesar was building temples, paving roads, and redesigning the Forum, just before the senators' daggers ended that project permanently. And then Augustus, Caesar's heir, rewrote everything. He famously said he found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. He wasn't exaggerating. By 100 AD, under the Emperor Trajan, 1 million people. In a city with no electricity, no engines, no steel. This is the city we're going inside. The Roman Forum was not primarily a pretty collection of temples. It was the center of the known world. Every major legal case in the empire was argued here. Political speeches that changed history were delivered here. Treaties were signed. Criminals were executed. Generals returned from war in triumph, riding chariots down the Via Sacra, the sacred road past these same columns, through crowds of hundreds of thousands. In the morning, it smelled of bread. The bakeries surrounding the Forum started before dawn. By the time the senators arrived, their togas freshly bleached with chalk, so white they were almost impossible to look at in direct sunlight, the vendors were already selling olives, garum fish sauce, fresh figs, and the flat round bread Romans ate at every meal. The Forum itself was about 150 meters long and 60 meters wide, roughly the size of 2 football pitches side by side. But it was packed with structures, temples, basilicas, arches, statues, the rostra speaking platform, the sacred flame of the Vestal Virgins burning at the Temple of Vesta at the eastern end. Romans didn't build in empty space. They built over, around, and on top of things. The Forum in 100 AD contained monuments from 6 centuries of Roman history, all simultaneously present, all in use. The Arch of Titus stood at the eastern entrance, built to commemorate the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD and the looting of its temple. On the arch's inner face you can still read, carved in relief, Roman soldiers carrying the great 7-branched menorah out of the burning temple. The original was gilded in gold. This was a city that processed its conquests in stone and marble, permanently, for everyone to see. For a Roman citizen in 100 AD, walking through this forum every morning was a daily reminder of one simple fact. There was no other place on Earth that mattered as much as this, and they were right. Every film you've ever seen is grey stone, worn, ancient. That's not what Romans saw. The exterior was faced in travertine limestone, cream-coloured, almost white in morning sun, warm gold in the evening. The arched niches on the second and third floors were filled with gilded bronze statues, 160 of them. The interior walls were painted. The seating was marble. The arena floor was covered in golden sand. The word arena literally means sand in Latin. And above all of it, spread across the top of the oval on a system of 240 masts, was the velarium, a retractable canvas awning operated by a dedicated team of sailors from the Imperial Navy that could shade 50,000 spectators from the Roman sun in under an hour. The games were free, not cheap, free. The emperor paid, admission was free, seating was assigned by social class, and programs were distributed at the entrance listing the day's events, gladiatorial bouts, animal hunts, and occasionally public executions staged as mythological reenactments. What the films also get wrong, most gladiators didn't die. A gladiator was an expensive investment. Owners fed them well, a high carbohydrate diet of barley and beans, which historians have confirmed built a layer of protective subcutaneous fat over their muscles. Training took years. Killing a gladiator in every fight would bankrupt the games within weeks. The death rate in the arena was roughly 1 in 10, brutal by any modern standard, but a successful gladiator could fight dozens of times, earn significant prize money, and retire. Some became celebrities. Their faces appeared on pottery, wall paintings, and jewelry. Women in particular found them objects of intense fascination. Graffiti on the walls of Pompeii records specific gladiators' romantic conquests in extremely direct terms. The Colosseum held games for over 400 years, from its inauguration by the Emperor Titus in 80 AD through to the last recorded games in the 6th century. In that time, historians estimate approximately 400,000 people died within its walls, alongside over 1 million animals. It seated more people than most modern sports stadiums. It was built in 8 years. No concrete formula from the ancient world has ever been fully replicated. Roman concrete, exposed to seawater, actually grew stronger over time. We are still trying to understand how they did it. Every image of ancient Rome focuses on the marble, the forum, the temples, the baths of Caracalla. Those buildings were real, and they were genuinely available to ordinary Romans. The baths especially were public, free or near free, and used daily by people of all classes. But the marble was where you went. It wasn't where you lived. 90% of Rome's 1 million people lived in Insulae, apartment blocks made primarily of brick and timber, rising up to 7 stories in some districts. A ground floor unit was expensive. It had better light, easier access to the street, and lower flood risk. The wealthy, or the aspiring middle class, lived on the lower floors. The higher you went, the cheaper the rent, and the more dangerous the living. Upper floors had no running water. Residents carried water up from public fountains. There were over 1,200 public fountains in Rome, fed by the aqueducts, running constantly, free to use. But carrying water 7 floors up in clay amphorae was exhausting. So many upper floor residents simply didn't. Fire was the constant terror. The Emperor Augustus established the Vigiles, a combined fire brigade and night watch, 7,000 men strong. They patrolled in shifts. But Rome burned anyway, multiple times, narrow streets, timber-framed upper stories, open cooking braziers, oil lamps burning all night. The Great Fire of 64 AD, Nero's fire, destroyed 10 of Rome's 14 districts. Outside the apartment door, the street was alive at all hours. Rome had a remarkable ordinance. No wheeled vehicles in the city centre during daylight hours. The streets were too narrow, the foot traffic too dense. This meant that every night, from dusk until dawn, the city was filled with the sound of carts. Iron wheels on stone pavements, the creak of ox harnesses, shouted instructions from drivers. The Roman satirist Juvenal, writing in the early 100s AD, complained that it was impossible to sleep in Rome. The noise was constant. The smells were overwhelming. The crowds never stopped. He moved to the countryside. He is not the last person to have had that reaction to city life. This is the Rome that 1 million people lived in. Not the marble, the noise, the smell, the bread, the fire risk, the neighbours through the ceiling. Familiar in ways that are slightly uncomfortable. Rome had 11 major aqueducts. Together, they delivered approximately 1 million cubic meters of water into the city every single day. For 1 million people, that's 1,000 litres per person, more than most modern European cities deliver today. The engineering behind this was precise to a degree that is frankly astonishing. An aqueduct is simply a channel with a very slight, continuous downward slope. Gravity does all the work, but maintaining that slope over 70 kilometers of Italian countryside, crossing valleys on arches, tunneling through hills, required surveying accuracy measured in centimeters. Roman surveyors used a device called a groma, essentially a cross-shaped sighting instrument on a pole, and achieved levels of accuracy that modern engineers have verified to within half a degree of horizontal over entire kilometers. The water arrived clean. Underground sections kept it in shade. Settling tanks every few kilometers dropped sediment. Lead pipes distributed it through the city. Yes, lead. A choice we now know was catastrophic for public health and may have contributed meaningfully to cognitive decline across the Roman aristocracy. But at the time, it was the practical material. The Cloaca Maxima, the Great Sewer, was old when Rome was young. Parts of it date to the 6th century BC. By 100 AD, it drained not just Rome, but most of the surrounding region, emptying directly into the Tiber. There were over 140 public toilets in Rome, flushed by running water diverted from the baths. This was not a primitive civilization fumbling in the dark. This was a city that had solved in stone and mathematics problems that would not be solved again in Europe for over 1,000 years after its fall. We don't know the exact day Rome reached 1 million people. We don't even know exactly when it happened. Sometime in the late 1st century BC, most likely, under Augustus. But we know that it did because the grain supply records confirm it. Rome could not feed itself. By 100 AD, the city was importing grain from North Africa and Egypt on a scale that required an entire government ministry to manage. The Annona, the grain supply, was one of the most powerful administrative offices in the empire. Disrupting it meant riots. The Roman mob, packed into Insulae with no farmland and no food stores, could turn violent within days of a supply interruption. The emperors knew this. Bread and circuses, panem et circenses, is a phrase from the satirist Juvenal, mocking the Roman people for caring only about food and entertainment. But the emperors who provided both weren't being cynical, they were being practical. A city of 1 million people with nothing to eat and nothing to do is a city on the edge of revolution. Free grain had been distributed to Roman citizens since 58 BC. By 100 AD, approximately 200,000 people in Rome received it, roughly a fifth of the population. It was not enough to live on, it was enough to not starve. The rest you earned, or begged, or stole. Rome had an enormous slave population. Estimates range from 30% to 40% of the city's inhabitants. Skilled slaves, educated Greeks, doctors, accountants, architects could earn money on the side, save it, and sometimes buy their freedom. Unskilled slaves could not. This is the city of 1 million. Incredible engineering, free water, free grain, free entertainment at the Colosseum, and 400,000 people in chains providing the labor that made all of it possible. The grandeur and the horror were not separate things, they were the same thing. The fall of Rome is a phrase that makes it sound like an event. It wasn't. It was a process that took 300 years, a slow depressurization, not an explosion. The Western Empire officially ended in 476 AD, when a Germanic chieftain named Odoacer deposed the last emperor, a teenager named Romulus Augustulus, a name that historians have noted is almost offensively symbolic, combining the city's legendary founder with its greatest emperor. But by 476, the city of Rome had already been sacked twice, by the Visigoths in 410 AD and by the Vandals in 455 AD. The sacks were not total destructions. The Visigoths were inside Rome for 3 days. They took what was portable and left. Most buildings survived. Most people survived. What didn't survive was the idea that Rome was eternal, invincible, the center of everything. In 410 AD, when news of the Visigoth sack reached the Christian philosopher Augustine in North Africa, he began writing a book called The City of God. His central argument, Rome was never eternal, only God's city was eternal. Rome's fall was proof that earthly cities, however magnificent, were temporary. The book changed Christian theology for 1,000 years. By 600 AD, Rome's population had fallen from 1 million to approximately 20,000. 98% of the city's inhabitants had left, died, or never been born. The aqueducts had been cut by the Ostrogoths during a siege in 537 AD and never fully repaired. Without water, the city contracted to the bend in the Tiber, where the river could be reached on foot. The hilltops, which in the imperial period had been the most desirable addresses in Rome, were abandoned. The Forum, which had once been the center of the world, became a cow field. For 900 years, he is standing in the ruins of a city he cannot imagine. The Roman Empire left behind roads, 46,000 miles of paved roads, from Scotland to Mesopotamia, most of them still traceable, and many still in use as the foundations of modern highways. It left behind a legal system, the concept of innocent until proven guilty, the right to face your accuser, the distinction between public and private law. Most of the world's legal systems today, whether based on Roman civil law or the English common law that evolved from it, are downstream of Rome. It left behind a language. Latin did not die when Rome fell. It transformed into Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Romanian, and the scientific and legal vocabulary embedded in English. Every time a doctor writes a prescription in Latin script, Every time a lawyer uses the phrase habeas corpus, every time you say etc., Rome is present. And it left behind an idea. The idea that a city, a human creation, could be built at a scale that matched human ambition. That engineering could overcome geography. That government could organize 1 million strangers into a functioning society. Every city you have ever lived in is, in some measure, a Roman experiment. We look at the ruins and we see the fall, but the Romans who lived here didn't see ruins. They saw a morning, a forum full of people, bread from the bakery. They saw a city so large, so intricate, so alive, that it seemed like it had always existed and always would. They weren't wrong about the first part.